Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. And a very warm welcome to everybody here today to this day of celebration. September 12th marks the United Nations International Day for SouthSouth Cooperation. So that is the primary purpose for why we are gathered here today. My name is Tormod Nuland. I'm working for the Norwegian Agency for Exchange Cooperation, Norec, and I'm going to be your humble moderator here today. In addition to the celebration, I'd like to mention we have some distinguished people here today who are very important to us in terms of this celebration. That is first State Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Mr. Jens Frølich Holte. And we also have a number of experts who will constitute a panel a little bit later today. So we will introduce them when we come to that panel. There's also an audience here. Thank you very much for coming. Very happy to have you all here. And in addition to those of you who are here today physically, we also have an audience who is here hopefully virtually, because this event is live streamed. So people are basically logging on wherever they can. So a very warm welcome to those who are joining us online as well. Now, there are three main purposes today why we are gathered here. And first, we are joining, as I said, to celebrate the United Nations International Day for SouthSouth Cooperation. We have seen over the last couple of decades that there has been a growth of collaboration in the global south when it comes to politics, economics, finance, culture, and so on and so forth, representing very much that there is an increased self-reliance in the global south. So that is really what we are celebrating today with this International South-South Collaboration Day. And that's why we've chosen the title of this event, From Recipient to Resource, because that's indeed what has happened. The recipients have become a resource. Secondly, we are here today to launch, in Norway that is, Norec's publication, South-South and Triangular Cooperation in Action. This has actually been launched before. It was launched back in March in Buenos Aires by State Secretary Holte, but we feel it is important to do it again, to do it here in Norway, here in Bergen. So we're going to ask him to do that again for us once more today. And thirdly, we are inviting you, viewers online and people here in the audience, to see a conversation between experts on this field. I'm going to say that many, many times today, repeat myself, saying South-South Cooperation, Triangular Cooperation. But that's what we are here to discuss. And the people who will be on that panel are experts on this area. And so they will be able to inform you and make you more knowledgeable than what you were when you entered here. So we hope this session today will be enjoyable, educational, and bring inspiration and new ideas. Another very, very important part for us is the office of the United Nations Cooperation for South-South Cooperation. They're a very, very important partner for us, and they are the main actor today during this celebration. So we're very privileged to be able to send a video message today from the envoy of the United Nations Secretary General for South-South Cooperation, the director of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation, Mr. Jorge Chediek. So without any further ado, we will broadcast a video message he has prepared specially for us today.
Dear friends, I wish you a good day from New York. My name is Jorge Chediek. I'm the director of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation and the envoy of the Secretary General for South-South Cooperation. This United Nations Day for South-South Cooperation is both a celebration of the economic, social, and political developments that have been made in recent years, and an important reminder of the critical action that still needs to be taken if we are to achieve the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. This year marks a new beginning for South-South and triangular cooperation. We are in a transformative era. The very successful second high-level United Nations Conference on South-South Cooperation that took place in March of 2019 in Buenos Aires, Argentina, demonstrated the great potential of this way of cooperation in producing great results in terms of productive capacity, trade, technology transfer, and supporting inclusive growth in developing countries. I am very grateful for the active engagement and participation of the government of Norway and Norec in this conference. BAPA Plus 40 highlighted the role of South-South cooperation as an important element of the global cooperation architecture for sustainable development. It recognized that the tremendous expansion and scope of South-South and triangular cooperation and the contributions it has made to regional, sub-regional, and inter-regional integration. In order to fulfill its enormous development potential, South-South cooperation needs to be further enhanced by improving financial mechanisms, the evaluation and assessment frameworks, the national research capacities, data and information, knowledge sharing on technical know-hows, and multi-stakeholder engagement, among many other factors. This need was confirmed globally by the conference, and we really need engagement of many actors in the process of having more South-South and triangular cooperation. Delivering the 2030 Agenda requires exploring new methods of working together. With this in mind, I am delighted to see so many important actors, including development actors, representatives of academia, researchers, and many others coming together to celebrate this day and mark the long-standing tradition of Norway as one of the primary partners in promoting and supporting South-South and triangular cooperation. Since the 1970s, Norway has exceeded the global commitment to providing 0.7% of gross national income annually as development assistance. In 2017, net official development assistance amounted to more than $3 billion. I would like to take this opportunity to offer my congratulations and sincere gratitude to the people of Norway for the commitment they have consistently demonstrated to global development and to build a better world. We are launching today a South-South in Action publication. South-South in Action is a series we launched 2 years ago to allow countries, organizations, and partners to showcase the work they're doing in South-South and triangular cooperation. This particular publication highlights the excellent work of Norec, which has really been doing an excellent work in promoting the exchange of experiences between North and South and within and among southern countries. The example of Norec is really very valuable, and we hope this publication will ensure that their efforts are consistently supported and expanded. As we move forward, there is also opportunity for Norec to establish and intensified with other think tanks, institutes, and learning institutions. One such example is the South-South Global Thinkers Network and the Global Coalition of Think Tanks Networks for South-South Cooperation. It's a joint organization of our office and UNDP, which covers approximately 250 think tanks and gives the opportunity to bring new perspectives on the various challenges of development cooperation. A closer relationship with such institutions would be of mutual benefit. Norec can learn from relevant studies on its research agenda, and also institutions can bid for studies commissioned by Norec. We can build more global public goods, more global knowledge for better development and better cooperation. At the same time, it's also important for Norec to continue building relations with its research community at home. We really look forward to stronger engagement of Norwegian think tanks and organizations in this joint effort. I look forward to continuing the strong partnership between Norec and UNOSCC for the years to come. I wish you for a fruitful discussion during the celebration of this day, and I look forward to concrete action points to enhance our joint efforts in South-South and triangular cooperation towards the 2030 agenda. We need it, and we count on the engagement of Norway and Norec in this collective global effort. Thank you very much for your participation.
So, very happy for this very clear message from the United Nations, happy for Norway's contribution, Norec's contribution, but also some challenges and some expectations. So that's very good. Next on, we will have today's keynote address, held by the State Secretary from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Jens Frølich Holte. Very much looking forward to hear how you regard South-South Cooperation, triangular cooperation, within the broader framework of Norwegian Development Cooperation. So, Mr. Holte, the floor is yours.
Here we are. Thank you. Many thanks for having this event. It's always a pleasure for me to come to Bergen, not because I'm from here, but because it's a truly global city. And Bergen Global, I would say that it couldn't be a more fitting place to talk about South-South cooperation and some of the big global issues that we are facing right now. I'm going to provide a bit of a bigger picture at first when it comes to global cooperation, to try to frame our positions and what we do with South-South cooperation, put it into a global context. Because what we are seeing today is an increasing debate on whether international cooperation is a good thing or a bad thing. There are very strong forces, big countries in this world, that are viewing multilateral cooperation as something that is undesirable, that it's something that's without effect, that it's something that should be avoided. Now, this is a big problem for Norway, to be frank. Norway is a small country with a very open society and open economy, and we have a lot to gain to keeping the multilateral system with rules-based international cooperation working at its best. So what the Norwegian government did in June this year was to launch a white paper on the role of multilateralism in Norway's foreign policy. I mean, the situation with more unrest, more instability in the international system is very worrying to us. And the multilateral system is the foundation for nearly all our development policies as well. So this white paper, although white papers from the Norwegian government will not change the world overnight, we do acknowledge that fact, but it's still a very clear political statement from us, and it has created a lot of attention globally. The German Minister of Foreign Affairs went to Norway to participate in the presentation of that white paper, and there's been a lot of interest from different countries. But because there is a global let's say coalition of countries willing to stand up for multilateralism and push back those countries that are moving away from international collaboration. So we try to take a realistic approach to international cooperation. We see the world as it is and not necessarily as we wishes it would be. Our clear position is that isolationism and protectionism is not the road to go down if you want sustainable development. To work to combat climate change, to clear our oceans of plastics, to give girls the education that they deserve, to provide a livelihood for farmers in Africa. You need international cooperation, and to reach all. I mean, the common theme in the Sustainable Development Goals is to leave no one behind. And to achieve that goal, you really need South-South cooperation to get there. Later this morning, you will hear from both Norad and Norec on a few of the more practical work that we do in the programs on South-South cooperation. Just to very briefly say a few words about the Knowledge Bank. It's coordinating and strengthening the technical cooperation and sharing of knowledge, in which Norway has very special competences. For instance, fisheries, hydropower, petroleum. You probably know about this from before, and you will learn a lot more about this after Tale has talked to you. I think it's a very powerful tool where also South-South cooperation is highly relevant, and I think it's one of the most effective ways of doing development cooperation, using the knowledge that we built up in Norway and sharing it with countries all over the world. And I'm particularly excited what we are doing now on the oceans. We are creating a new program called Oceans for Development. We have scaled up our tax administration and tax for development programs substantially over the last few years. And I'm from the Conservative Party. I'm not particularly happy about taxes, or at least the level of taxes. But having a well-functioning tax system, I could speak all day about that. I will not, but it's really, really effective development policy, which potentially can have an extremely high impact. And we also, not the least, organizing this event, Norec. It's our main focal point for actually getting the South-South cooperation out there and doing the practical bit about the people and exchanging people from the global north to the global south, and the collaboration with the UN office. As we saw in the video, there was a lot of good words about what Norec is doing, and I was almost blushing a bit when he was talking, but it shows the position that Norec and Norway as well has when it comes to South-South cooperation. I participated in the conference that Cedek mentioned in Buenos Aires in March this year, the BAPA plus 40. Where we also launched the report. So hereby the report is also being launched here in Norway. It was a very crowded room in Buenos Aires, so a lot of interest about what we are doing. And what struck me there at those meetings was the very high degree of interest in South-South cooperation from countries from every part of the world. I mean, for our part, we see that South-South cooperation can definitely improve the effectiveness of our development policies and our development projects. It gives us a broader perspective and a broader picture of what we're trying to achieve. It's also a great way of diffusing knowledge to more people and more settings. Also adding value across the various programs that we have in our development cooperation. And last but not least, it's also a very correct strategic priority for Norway to be engaged deeply in South-South cooperation. One of the reasons, of course, being our very strong commitment to spending 1% of our national income on development assistance, which is it's a lot of money, which has to be managed wisely, and using South-South cooperation can really help us unlock the potential of that big amount of money in a different way than just money can do. because you get more people, more diffusion of knowledge. And it's also a nice and, I say, important way of engaging with different countries from around the world. I mean, in the days at that conference in Buenos Aires, we had meetings with countries from like South Africa and Equatorial Guinea, Bolivia, Eswatini. You had a wide range of people that you were able to meet to discuss both foreign policy and development policy. So, I mean, what I discovered there was, in our meetings there, was also the strong willingness to stand up to defend the multilateral system, the UN as the centerpiece of the multilateral system, and that's a dimension that adds to our understanding of South-South cooperation. That is also a values-based. We see eye to eye on the values of multilateral cooperation. So I might also mention, as you might know, that Norway is also running for a seat in the UN Security Council for the period from 2021 to 22, with elections in June 2020. And you know, our Security Council candidacy is really building on what we do already. It's about Norway being Norway, and I was really struck by the the emphasis that we put emphasis on South-South cooperation, and it really resonates very well on the multilateral issues as well, and the promotion of multilateralism. So I think with Norway being a very consistent partner globally for supporting the UN, for providing 1% of our income to development assistance, we have a very let's say we have a credibility when it comes to South-South cooperation that we need to build on, and that, of course, we are extremely happy that Norec can be our our global player when it comes to South-South cooperation, with the dedication and also the presence, evidenced by what we did in Buenos Aires, and also evidenced by the very nice video that was made by the UN office on South-South cooperation. So there's a lot of potential, and I really look forward to following the discussions here throughout this morning, and thank you for the attention.
Thank you very, very much for that, State Secretary Holte, and for launching the report. Now we will move over to the experts of the day. We hope that we will achieve to shed light on South-South cooperation from different angles, because now we will use experts from academia, research, from the development side, from the institutional side, and as well as from civil society. So what we're going to do is that we're going to have individual presentations by the panel members here on stage. Each of them will have 7 minutes to explain their side of the story. After that, we will gather them here, and there will be a possibility for you people in the audience to ask questions so you can be further enlightened. First of all, I'd like to ask for a little bit of assistance in terms of putting up the stage in order. Just, yeah.
I think we'll wait.
Okay, good, no problem. Great, then without any further ado, we will move on to Mr. Elling Tjønneland, who represents the institution with which we are co-hosting today, Christian Michelsen Institute, CMI. He will talk about the initiation, the start of, and the growth of South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation internationally. He will give an overview of what Norway has done in the field, and this is very much based on work he's been doing before. He has been preparing a report to the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, Norad. This report is entitled Norwegian Aid and Triangular South-South Cooperation Mapping, Analysis and Implications for Norwegian Knowledge Transfer. So, Mr. Tjønneland, the floor is yours.
Thank you for, can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you for inviting me to talk around one of my favorite topics, regional cooperation, South-South cooperation. What I will do, I will briefly say something about history and evolution of South-South cooperation. You can read much more about it in the report that I prepared for Norad. And then I'll jump into talking about what we can learn from the single biggest Norwegian support for South-South cooperation. Later I will tell you what that project is. South-South cooperation has a very long history. It is nothing new, but it's a new life and new dynamism around it these days. It emerged perhaps as an idea way back in the 1950s when China met together with other newly independent countries in Bandung, in Indonesia, and laid the foundation for what was to become political cooperation with newly independent countries, which later became the non-aligned movement, and which later found its expression in the UN, in its South-South office, the Buenos Aires conference 40 years ago, and so on. This political cooperation also involved practical cooperation, support for development purposes, perhaps most strikingly in projects such as the big Tazara Railway between Zambia and Tanzania, funded and built by the Chinese way back in the late 60s, early 70s, support for the liberation movements, and so on. Later, it gave birth to regional cooperation for development, economic development, integration in the South. If you go to the dusty archives of this institute, of CMI, you will find in the late 70s a number of reports and studies prepared for the governments of Tanzania and Zambia on how to use regional cooperation to advance development and poverty reduction in Southern Africa. And in the early 70s, early 80s, there were a number of reports and studies prepared by CMI for Norad and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on how they could support that process. So it has a long history. There is a new dynamism today, politically, perhaps first expressed, most clearly expressed 8-9 years ago at the Busan conference in South Korea in 2011, which again was an important in the next step, which was the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals by the UN. And what distinguishes those events from previous similar events was the new role played by the global South and developing countries. They suddenly become forceful actors in developing global policies for development. This, of course, reflected, and this is important, the changing role of these developing countries themselves. Not only did they have more resources, to be in charge of their own development, some of them also had resources and were beginning to think how it could be used to help promote development in other countries. One dimension of this, and this is one I'm going to talk about here, is knowledge transfer, sharing of experiences, which has perhaps been a cornerstone of much of the South-South thinking. And the ideas from this has also been picked up by the traditional aid agencies, who have largely zoomed in on perhaps 3 issues. One is that they realized that perhaps the experiences and lessons from developing countries are more relevant for other developing countries than experiences and lessons from the North. A second issue is that it has often considered to be much cheaper than using technical assistance and knowledge transfer from the North. And finally, but less clearly expressed, there has been a growing thinking that the best way to respond to the rise of global South powers like China, India, or even smaller ones, is to work with them, to try and rope them in and join us, that is the North, in promoting development. So this is the background and the short history. Let me use, as I said, an example to illustrate this. And that is the single biggest SouthSouth project, as far as I know, in the history of Norwegian aid. For some strange reasons, it's not mentioned in the report I prepared for Norad, but it's briefly mentioned in a box in the Norec catalog, the Norad report launched today, and that is the Norwegian support. It was a brainchild of Norway to use civil servants from Uganda, Ethiopia, and Kenya to mentor civil servants in a newly independent South Sudan. And from 2011 and up to this year, Norway has disbursed about 240 million kroner to fund this program. It's a sole funder of the program. It's more managed by the UNDP. And they have seconded or paid for about 320 civil servants from South Sudan's neighboring countries to come and spend up to 2 years in South Sudan, mentoring. Officially, figure is 2,200 South Sudanese public employees in more than 60 public institutions. Generally, this program has received high marks. It's hailed as an important project with the best intentions, but I also have to say that these reports are largely based on just the intentions of the program and the fact that it actually has managed to second 320 civil servants. The fact that I managed to do so is important and is an important lesson. You also have to keep in mind that they managed to do this at the time when South Sudan, as you know, has been characterized by civil war. And a lot of the people had to be evacuated and so on, but still they managed to deliver. The program was implemented. But we have to look beyond the intentions of the program. The program failed in its attempt to promote knowledge transfer and to build capacity of state institutions in South Sudan. There are several reasons for that. The experts or the civil servants from the neighboring countries were perhaps not that prepared. The qualifications were not necessarily the most appropriate needed. More importantly, there was very little targeting and strategic thinking about selecting institutions, so they went all over the place. I mean, more than 60 institutions, I think, benefited from this. The most difficult thing was, of course, that they didn't really manage to find appropriate people to mentor. This was challenging, and we have to keep in mind that South Sudan, July 2011 at independence, they hardly had any government institutions. Most of the institutions composed of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people in a tent or a container. And the single biggest employer in that country in 2011, apart from the army that is, was Norsk Folkehjelp. We had a staff of 1,100. And that tells you something about the challenges involved in building capacity in that country. So it failed to achieve many of its, or most of its objectives. It was, in the end, just simply gap filling by the civil servants from neighboring countries. There is a parallel example from South Sudan that is also provides important lessons. That is a bilateral project between Norway and South Sudan, which is one of Tale's projects, the Oil for Development Program, which was a much more targeted intervention. It succeeded in building capacities, which was sustained in the Ministry of Oil and Petroleum, but it failed when it came to have any impact on how South Sudan were to use its oil revenues, 99% of the income. Finally, let me conclude by 3 observations. I'll begin by saying that knowledge transfer, SouthSouth Cooperation is a good thing. It's important and should be supported and expanded. But there are 3 important lessons for me. One is that you have to be very clear about the purpose and what you want to achieve when you embark on it. The second thing is that, and I have no hard evidence to say what I'm saying now, but I spent a good part of my life looking at capacity building programs and training. And what has struck me is that when you go to these institutions, the staff there, they have CVs full of training courses attended, study tours, where I participated and so on. But what is often lacking is education, higher education, tertiary education, whether it's professional, vocational, or higher education. And without that, you can only do so much with your workshops. Finally, and this is perhaps the most important lesson from the South Sudan experience and the role of the neighboring states, and that is that what Uganda, Ethiopia, and Kenya is doing in South Sudan, deployment, secondment of civil servants is probably the least important thing. It's what they are doing at the political level, through their investment by business people and so on in the country, and how they meddle in internal domestic South Sudanese politics that are the most important dimension of SouthSouth Cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Elling Tjønneland. Great contribution, many perspectives, important things to bear in mind. Next up, Tale Kvalvaag from the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, Norad, will present about an entity called the Knowledge Bank, how it works, and how it works also on South-South Cooperation. So without any further ado, Tale, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation here. Let me just start off by saying Happy International Day on South-South Cooperation. It's a joy to be here and celebrate that with you. And secondly, I'd like to stress I'm no expert. I was being introduced as an expert. I'm a generalist, but fortunately, I work with a lot of experts. I think our State Secretary really introduced the Knowledge Bank in a wonderful way. The basic idea is that we share experiences from areas where Norway has a lot of experience, competencies, etc. So I am the head of what's called the Knowledge Bank. If we separate those two words, let's start off by the bank. You can ask, okay, what's the capital? Well, the capital is basically brain power of a lot of Norwegian higher education institutions, directorates, ministries, etc. We're about 35, 40 of them in total, sharing their experiences and knowledge. Secondly, that's the knowledge then of the Knowledge Bank. It's their brain power that we share. We are basically a composition of a lot of different programs. I think about 10 in total, depending a bit on how you count. Some of them are mentioned here today. We call them for development in the sense that it's oil for development, fish for development, etc. And it's a demand base. That's a very important principle to us. It's supposed to be built on demand. So let's say a country discovers oil resources and they're like, oh, this is all new to us. We need some assistance here. They can come to Norway then and say, would you please let us know how you figured it out, what's your experiences. So we don't really give advice directly, but it's more of a sharing of our experiences, good and bad, things that worked and things that didn't really work as well. So that's basically our bank, and of course we are as well part of the global agenda, the Agenda 2030, just like everyone else should be these days. I was asked also to address a bit on the modalities of how we work. It's through institutional cooperation that we primarily work with the governments in our partner countries. We do this in different manners. We often talk about shoulder by shoulder in the sense that you'll have an engineer from Norway working with an engineer in, let's say, Mozambique, and together figuring out how to solve issues. Some people talk of that as peer-to-peer, which is also what we do, and they're different within that sort of main modality. There are a lot of ways we can address these issues. We can have a long-term advisor present, we can do mentoring, as was mentioned as an example here as well, or we do courses. We're also working on e-learning. So it really depends on the purpose, and then we try to fit how we can share those Norwegian experiences through different manners. So we have a lot of different agreements, framework agreements, let's say with research institutions and others. And we work primarily long-term. We're in for the long haul, so to say. These reforms and changes that we're trying to contribute to they take a lot of time. We also have a few sort of light programs where we have more of targeted efforts and shorter maybe courses, for instance. Fortunately, Norway has been doing this for a long time, for decades. So we have a lot of experiences, we have evaluations, etc., and also reviews that we can build on. So we know what works, but this is really hard. We're doing a bit of what I would call social engineering, and it's important to build on those experiences. Then, since today is about SouthSouth Cooperation, I'd like to address that primarily. We speak of triangular cooperation, actually, even more than South-South. I know there's a bit of a mix sometimes when it comes to definitions. But this is actually a separate or a clear goal in the budget proposition is for us as the Knowledge Bank to increase our efforts towards triangular cooperation, sort of the North-South-South cooperation. I'd like to stress it's of course not entirely new to us, but I think we've become more aware of how to address this and the importance of addressing this since the Knowledge Bank was established about a year and a half ago. So we started off by this kind of mapping exercise that Tjønneland just presented, which I think was really useful to have a knowledge base. We also went through the different programs within our department just to see sort of what efforts are we actually supporting. And we're also working with the statistics to see how much are we supporting or contributing with today, and to be able to actually say something about the increase. Within our portfolio, we have a higher education portfolio, which is called Norad. That's about capacity building through academic partnerships, and I think that's probably the most advanced triangular cooperation. They even speak of a South-South-North cooperation, and very often it's the partnering institution, academic institution in the South, that's our agreement partner. So a lot of the responsibility and ownership is being put on them, so to speak. In the panel, I'd like to share other experiences as well. Oil for Development was also mentioned here. And in their experience, to have a lot of these sort of regional meetings and platforms is really useful, because then I think the relevance very often of sharing, for instance, Lebanon will come to regional gathering and say how they did their licensing rounds, which is perhaps feels closer to home sometimes for, let's say, neighboring countries, rather than maybe just the Norwegian experiences. So we're discussing eternally a lot on the role that we as the Knowledge Bank should have in this case, whether it should be as a facilitator, whether we should be financing, there are different roles we could take when it comes to triangular cooperation. So we see a lot of opportunities. We also see that triangular cooperation takes time, and perhaps this would require more of a systematic approach from our side, but we definitely see a lot of advantages, and I'm happy to discuss some of these possibilities in the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tale Kvalvaag of Norad. Next up, Margaret Bakken is Director of Programs for Norec, the Norwegian Agency for Exchange Cooperation. She will present a bit about Norec's model of working. Mutual exchange of personnel within a framework of partnership, and how this model is being applied on a triangular and on South-South cooperation. So Marit, without any further ado, please.
Thank you, Tormod. And thanks to everyone who's here today on the launch of our report on Norec's work on South-South and triangular cooperation projects. I'm going to start by sharing the first sentence in our new vision. Norec just released a new strategy, and with that, a new vision. And that is, the world is full of knowledge and skills. And this forms the basis of how we have worked previously, but also what will be one of our main focuses when we continue to work as Norec. Knowledge is not something that's available just in one place, within one specific group of people, in certain countries. It's everywhere. And in the projects that Norec supports, we have different countries, different kinds of partner institutions that collaborate between various countries again. In some of them, a Norwegian partner is involved. In others, it's not. So we have North-South projects, triangular projects where it's one Norwegian partner and 2 or more South partners, and South-South projects. About 2/3 of our 75 active projects are in the South-South portfolio. And that is something that makes us really proud, and specifically on a day like today. So, Norec, we support international partnerships with funds to exchange personnel. What these projects have in common is that they develop their goals together and they work actively together to achieve them. I'm going to tell a little bit about how it works. Within a 7-minute frame, it's going to be very overall, but it's 3 main points. And I want you to just keep in mind that all of our 75 projects are also different and take on different approaches to this line. But number 1, 2 or more institutions in our partner countries, they want to collaborate in order to strengthen each other's work and to make sure that they all do a better job. Number 2, Norec facilitates meeting points between these institutions, where they develop the project together, they find the purpose, they figure out what are we going to achieve that we wouldn't have achieved if we didn't collaborate. They set goals together, and they make a plan to achieve it. And the third point, a Norec project actively starts when these institutions start to exchange personnel, volunteers or professionals, in order to achieve this. And then this continues. And as with the Knowledge Bank, we also support programs with the perspective of long-term cooperation, because we know that this takes time. So our projects, they don't just exchange people for one round once, but for a long period of time, over and over again, and with different people. What we have learned through experience from the past years is that there is a lot of things both to learn and to teach when you are in a different country and you work for a different institution. And in our projects, that's the framework as well. You're both going to contribute and both going to learn something that you're going to take back home. Because the greatest potential we see for learning and for development is what happens when a person who's been abroad comes back home and starts working again either in your own institution or in your own community, and to strengthen that work. After years of collaboration, our partners then, at least potentially, have a huge network of people where they both can use input from the participants they have received from their partner institutions, but also the ones who has returned. Sometimes also in a combination. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about reciprocity. It's a word that's not often used in everyday conversations, but it's a very important core value for Norec. All partners in the project has to work together in order to shape the project and its goals. And in our project, it means that everyone contributes and everyone benefits from the cooperation. As Norec, we facilitate and follow up on this. When partners work together over time, with this as a main focus, it does lead to better sharing of responsibilities, ownership of not just your own results and what you want to achieve, but also your partner's results, and a shared understanding of the challenges, both on an institutional level and a societal level. It also fosters respect, and it allows people to participate in the development of their own institutions and in their own society. This is not easy. It sounds easy when I talk about it, but in real life, it's difficult, and it does take time. It's not something that happens automatically, and it must be worked on. But we do believe that this is a very good way of working together, and it's a way that also makes our partners into stronger contributors to the Sustainable Development Goals. That means that we, as Norec, have a framework for how we want our partners to collaborate, but we do not dictate what the partners should learn from each other or who they should learn from. Originally, in the very beginning, all our partners and projects had a Norwegian partner, but we very soon realized that most of our partners in the Global South, they could also develop just as good by collaborating with another institution in the South. So as I said in the beginning, we have 75 active projects. About 2/3 of them are SouthSouth projects. In the report that's launched today, it's a presentation on a few of them, just to show a variety of the kinds of projects that we support. And these principles of working together over time, developing project together, and that's equally important for all our projects, whether it's a Norwegian partner involved, if it's a triangular cooperation, or a South-South collaboration. All of them use exchange as a tool in their international partnerships in order to strengthen the cooperation and each other's work. Sometimes the best partner is found on the other side of the world, and sometimes it's found in your neighboring country. And we facilitate for both of them. I'm looking forward to the discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marit. Next up is a practitioner who has been working together with Norec for a long time. Mr. Jon Wigum Dahl of Bergen Haukeland University Hospital will give his side of this story. I have to be a little bit strict now because we're running slightly short on time. It's important to have time for the discussion, so if you can limit to 5 minutes, the last presenters. Very sorry for that, but
That's not fair.
it's not fair, but it's necessary. So sorry. So, Jon, please.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to come here to you today. My name is Jon Wigum Dahl. I'm head of the international department at Haukeland University Hospital. We are one of the biggest employers here in Western Norway, more than 12,000 staff members, as a regional hospital for Western Norway. We have been involved in international work for ages. In our hospital, it's more than 100 years old, but in 2003, it was decided that we need to have our own department to coordinate the international activities, mainly because we had a big Norad-funded project in Ethiopia in burn injuries and cleft lip and palate programs. And of course, Norad and the Norwegian Embassy in Addis demanded reports and audited accounts and so on from us, and it was complicated for the plastic surgeons to do this. And we were established at that time, and since then we have developed a lot, and we have a number of projects. I think we have a turnover of more than 400 million Norwegian kroner since we started, in money from the Norwegian Embassy in Norad, from Frølich in Norec, and a lot of private donors also. So today we have more than 30 departments involved in our hospital in the international activities. We have new strategies approved by our board of directors in 2017, and we have 5 partner hospitals in the south. As you can see here, we have 3 main partner hospitals in Eastern Africa. It's Black Lion Hospital in Addis, it's Kamuzu Central Hospital in Malawi, and Mnazi Hospital in Zanzibar. And we have 2 more advanced university hospitals also in the south, in South Africa, George Macquarie Academic in Pretoria, and CMC in India. And we have a clear policy. We should stick to these partner hospitals for years after years. This is where we have competence to send our medical personnel. This is where we know how to organize work permits and license and so on. And we have exchanging personnel with Norec funding also, as I will show you, between these institutions just for years and years and years. And we have also built, with funding from Frølich and Norec, our own staff houses. First in India, in CMC, and then in Zanzibar, and now we are building in Malawi, where our Norec participants can stay safely on a hospital campus. So we save money and it's a safe accommodation. So I was asked to say a little bit about the SouthSouth projects. We had one very successful project, I think I must say, on the blood banking between Zanzibar and Nepal, 2016 to 18. It was a triangular program with our blood bank here in Haukeland, but they had their own SouthSouth partnership between Zanzibar and Nepal. And in Nepal, they're very good in mobilizing blood donors. That is a challenge in Zanzibar, but in Zanzibar, they have very good programs on quality control on the laboratory services, which is also very important, of course, running a blood bank. And they exchanged laboratory personnel, recruiting officers between these 2 blood banks for these 3 years with funding from Norec. It was absolutely a successful project, I must say. It was a challenge to arrange for work permits in Nepal, but that is for all type of foreign personnel working in Nepal. But another SouthSouth project we had was in plastic surgery between India and Ethiopia in our early lives, between 2003 and 2006. And it was nurses and doctors between these 2 institutions, CMC and Black Lion, and also the Department of Plastic Surgery in Haukeland burn unit was involved in that, so it was a triangular exchange program. And very good results also here. So we have also a number of other SouthSouth projects which is funded with other donors. We are training pediatric nursing staff and in midwifery in South Africa from Zanzibar. We have in Malawi today, we have an orthopedic surgeon from Ethiopia and a neurosurgeon from Ethiopia who are now working in our partner hospital in Malawi. This is funded by our private donor from Bergen who is supporting us a lot, helping to do a competence building in Malawi in Lilongwe in Kamuzu Central Hospital. And we have a number of residents in specialization with funding from mainly Norad under Norad programs in India and CMC for 3 to 6 months hands-on training in the big hospital there in Vellore outside Chennai. Very successful program, I must say. The Indians are very happy to receive candidates from Africa for hands-on training at their hospital there. Yeah. So also from our side in Haukeland, over these years, we had more than 150 health personnel, doctors and nurses and technical personnel from Haukeland participated in exchange programs with funding from Norec. More than 30 neurosurgeons in Ethiopia has been trained under this program. And one of them are now in Malawi participating there. And in the cleft lip and palate project, we have today, this month, we have 2 plastic surgeons from Ethiopia who was 10 years ago as Norec participants. Now they are senior doctors, consultants, and professors in Ethiopia in 2 different hospitals, running big programs in burn injuries and cleft lip and palate projects. And they could probably report, they can document now 26,000 operations on cleft lip and palate have they done since we started this project in 2004. So, and they're running everything themselves now. So this is very concrete examples. And I could add one more very concrete example from our side. We have an exchange program on the 3rd round is now between the emergency center at Akuttmottak in Haukeland and emergency center at the hospital in Pretoria we are working with. And in the first round, we had 1 doctor, 1 gastrosurgeon and 1 nurse, and now we have 2 nurses there. And in 1 year he was there, he operated more than 100 knife stabbings and gunshots in the abdomen, while he did here in Norway, we hardly have 1 or 2 a year, but it's very important for us that our doctors have practical experience, of course, in doing these things. So we gain a lot of knowledge back to our own institutions in areas like this. So we are very happy for the Norec support in that area. Of course, there are challenges. When we are receiving medical personnel from the south, they don't get medical license to work here in Norway. So they have more to work like students, nurse students or medical students, but they're not able to operate on our patients in Haukeland. It can be a challenge. And it's a challenge, of course, on the exchange periods that they could be too short or too long. And the age limit we are continuously discussing with Norec, because it's an age limit of 35 years, you know. And often if you are a medical specialist, you are hardly completed your training before you reach the age limit of 35 years. But there has been some flexibilities from your side in Norec, so we're happy for that, of course. And of course, it's a lot of administrative workload to do these projects, but we don't receive very much administrative support in terms of money from Norec, so we will, of course, like to see more of that. And the lady here, she is in your report. She is a nurse from Zanzibar, a pediatric nurse who was with us in Haukeland. So we're happy to have her on front page here. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jon Wigum Dahl. Very nice to hear concrete examples of results and also challenges. Now, Norwegian Red Cross. Mr. Juma Ochieng from the Norwegian Red Cross will talk about their motivation for actually starting up a triangular South-South youth exchange program to supplement a North-South exchange program they have been going for a long, long time. So, Juma, please, your contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be invited here. As been mentioned, I'm going to talk about our motivation, which means that actually we haven't really begun our South-South Cooperation, but that's what we're thinking about to do. I'm going to basically talk about Youth Delegates Exchange Program, which I manage, which is a Norec, Norwegian Red Cross Corporation. Exchange of young delegates with different countries, and this has been ongoing since 2002. So the whole life of Norec. Norwegian Red Cross is one of 191 national societies, and out of the 191 national societies, it's only Norwegian Red Cross that does a mutual exchange. Where we send and receive delegates for the same period of time. And we've been very humbled to realize that actually we, as Norwegian Red Cross, could learn a lot from other countries. That we were not a bank of knowledge. There was a lot of other knowledge from Lebanon, from Colombia, from Kenya, that they had much, much more knowledge than we had, and we've been learning from that. And it is through this lens of seeing the capacity and the capabilities of these other national societies that we are taking a step to try and support or to try and facilitate also that these countries can be able to support each other in ways where we cannot support them as Norwegian Red Cross. For example, we know that we've seen that Colombia Red Cross has capacity that Kenya Red Cross does need, which Norwegian Red Cross does not have. So can Kenya Red Cross learn from Colombia Red Cross, and how can Norwegian Red Cross facilitate that? So that is our point of departure into trying and thinking about how do we come in and support us South-South on triangular cooperation. So what is our model? Our model is to have permanent, or not permanent, but long-term partners, say Colombia Red Cross, Kenya Red Cross, and Lebanon Red Cross, where Norwegian Red Cross does a North-South, but also triangular support with them. And then they have a South-South across the continent, and then they also have regional. So Kenya Red Cross will have a Lebanon Red Cross and Colombia Red Cross as SouthSouth Cooperation. And then Kenya Red Cross can also support South Sudan, for example, Somali Red Cross, Kenya, Ugandan Red Cross, and Tanzanian Red Cross. So this both expands capacity development, but also supports regional capacity development and also general South-South cooperation. What are the main things that we've seen, and why are we thinking that this is important? Number one is about adaptation. We see that a lot of the national societies start projects that is already done by other national societies. So if they are able to learn from what has already been done, they don't have to start from scratch. There's no need for Kenya Red Cross to start from scratch something that Colombia Red Cross has been doing for 5 years. So they can learn from that and accelerate it. That's number one. Number two is that we see that these countries have projects that are based on similar contexts. And the Norwegian context is very different. So they can learn from each other from that. And number three is that a lot of their projects are also based on constrained resources. And that the availability of resources is not as much as we have in Norway. And so when they adapt, when they support each other with projects that are based on the resources that they have, then there might be easier to sustain and also to accelerate these projects. So that's our thinking. And this is what we are discussing with Norec now, and this is what we want to do in the years to come. What do we think are a few of the challenges? One is, I think it's two things. One is based on what a challenge that has already been mentioned, and a challenge that we have now is about asymmetry. Marit has talked about reciprocity, and that's a challenge, because Norwegian Red Cross, for example, even though we want the exchange to be mutual and to be reciprocity, Norwegian Red Cross is also a donor organization. So even when we're doing YDEP, Norwegian Red Cross supports a lot of other projects within this country, and most of these projects is based on finance. And that causes some sort of asymmetry. And it can still be a challenge between, for example, Kenya Red Cross and South Sudan Red Cross. That there can be asymmetrical challenges. And the second thing is about sustainability, that we want to see that there is financing from project planning to monitoring and evaluation, which is not only about exchange of people, but the whole process of A to Z project management. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Juma. Great to hear all your contributions. Now, we do have some time left for having questions from the audience, shedding a little bit more light on this way of working. So, close to 20 minutes. So I'd like to ask the panel members, please, to take your seats up here.
The ones without microphones should maybe sit on this side, and the ones who have microphones can maybe. Okay.
Yeah. I think loading up for the audience, but I think I'll take the liberty of actually starting by asking a question myself. And I'd like to direct that question to Elling Tjønneland, because as a researcher, you sort of see things a little bit from the outside, of the developments there. We heard from Haukeland how they are actually, when we traditionally think of exchange and cooperation, we think that we will go into the world and learn people, other places, about things, because we know the best. Whereas actually, it was a very concrete example that Norwegian doctors are going abroad and getting their capacity enormously increased by going to the south and learning a lot. In your experience, are we, when we talk about triangular corporations, are we in Norway, are we good when it comes to making use of the knowledge that exists in the south?
That was an interesting question, and the short answer to that, well, we haven't been good enough, but we are learning. Norwegian doctors have been going to the field for decades. In the old days, it was often as a technical expert going out there, providing whatever services they were able to provide, and then returning home and doing whatever they were doing back home. That was the classical way of providing knowledge to the South. But it was realized, beginning perhaps in the 80s, but gaining momentum in the 90s, that this model doesn't work. It doesn't build capacity. It is not really about transferring knowledge. It's about filling a gap. And when it comes to the medical field, an area I haven't really studied, but from the outside, I live close by Haukeland and so on. I know that Haukeland has been in the forefront in promoting and implementing a very different model. You do deploy and second your staff, but it's linked to long-term efforts to promote the building of institutions and capacity within the institutions. And that is important. The second aspect, which is much more, and that I guess is your question, are we able to learn sufficiently from that? And I think that the examples you mentioned also tells us that there is much that can be learned from engaging with partners in the South. For example, sending medical personnel to work in trauma clinics in South Africa. You get a different kind of experience than what you get from just studying here. So it's a kind of a mutual benefit. And just to end by that, I mean, I'm coming from a research institute, which has a long history of engaging and working with partners, research partners, collaborators in the South. And of course, it's not simply about transferring knowledge from our side, which might be one component, but it's also about the mutual benefit of working together, understanding and finding solutions to development problems.
Thank you very much for that. Dear audience, now's your good chance to ask questions. It would be great if you could say who you are, if you're representing an institution, which institution that might be, and then put your question. So please.
I'm Otto Mesta from CMI. I had a question to Tale. We have heard several interventions here focusing on the benefit of SouthSouth Cooperation in terms of similar contexts. And I would guess that for the Knowledge Bank and their more North-South cooperation, there might be a challenge in terms of, there are different contexts and, experiences from Norway might not always be relevant to the countries where we work in. How do you deal with that? Do you see that conflict or that tension, and how do we deal with that in practice?
It's a very pertinent question indeed. We just had a training course actually Monday and Tuesday this week with where we invited a lot of those Norwegian institutions contributing to the knowledge bank and then working with governments in our cooperating countries. And we talk about context because it's important that they're aware and that they're we encourage them to be sort of curious as to what are the structures, what's the culture in the countries they work with. We advise them on where to find literature, for instance, to understand sort of the politics and economics of that country. So that's definitely something we're working on. And it's, I guess what's challenging is that we are in quite a few different countries and there are a lot of different contexts. So in order to sort of cover them all, there's a need to be more generic as to where to find that kind of literature. We also work, of course, closely with the embassies, the Norwegian embassies in the specific countries. They are much more aware of the context than we can ever be based in Norway. So I think that's a different role they have and that we can truly benefit from. And it's sometimes, you can read a lot of articles, etc., about the context, but to understand the nitty-gritty of how things really work, what are the power relations within a certain institution. You think maybe from an organogram, this is the boss and that's the structure of it all. But then you figure out after a year or two, no, the ones really making the decisions are someone else. So to understand that kind of the power dynamics, I think that's definitely something we address and work with the Norwegian institutions on to be aware of that, certainly.
Anyone else? If not, it's always tempting to pick up on power dynamics and go to Norec and Marit. We have some of the same, you might think there might be some of the same things regarding Norec. Money comes from Norway. We have institutions in different countries. Some are stronger than the others. What are the mechanisms Norec is using to keep the power dynamics in check and make them more fair?
It's a big question. It's something that we talk about not every day, but a lot internally. Not just within the employees in Norec, but also with our partners. Of course, power dynamics, they will be there all the time. And as you also say, it's something that it's continuous work. From our side, it's about being aware. And I think just having discussions like this is one step. What we do actually do is that for our partners, we make sure that they get to meet each other. In a feasibility phase, before they start their projects, we need them to sit down together and we facilitate this meeting point. Because we know it's like you also mentioned, it's easy for one to know what the other might need, and then you don't really know, are they saying you need this? Or is it just, yes, no, that sounds like a good idea because it's coming from Norway, or it's coming from someone you look at as someone with more knowledge than what you have. Okay. But addressing these issues and facilitating discussions around it is one thing that we do. Also, again, as the Knowledge Bank is saying, long-term cooperation. Having more people working together, it's both on an individual level, but when the institutions also get to know each other more, it's easier to bring up these discussions. We try through our reports to ask for reflections around it, but we know it's difficult. It's difficult to take up this transparency. Is it transparent enough between the partners? Is it enough sharing of information? And it will be different needs. So it's something that continuously has to be worked on.
Thank you very much. Yes, please, Tale.
If I could add to that, a key word in our vocabulary, so to speak, is trust. And a lot of the institutions with which we work, they say it takes a year or two to actually build that kind of trust for the cooperating institution to sort of let the Norwegian institution see their dirty laundry, so to speak, in a very direct manner. What are the real issues that we're struggling with? Because very often as Marit was saying also, it's a matter of figuring out what the true needs are, where you can make a difference. And if you're not aware of the power structures looking into that, you can really do more harm than good, I would say. Definitely.
Great, thank you very much for that. Audience, as I said, this is your chance. If not, we will continue to ask questions from here. And we might do that. I mean, one interesting thing now, I'd like to encourage you, Juma, because you are about to embark on this, doing SouthSouth Cooperation. And, now is your chance as well with these actors. If there are things you make note of that they are saying that maybe you could try and implement in your programs. I don't know what your observations are based on the discussions we've had.
No, I think everything that is being mentioned is things that we've thought about, and might also be actually the reasons why we are trying to promote like South-South and triangular cooperation. We're saying we know that from a Norwegian Red Cross perspective that within the federation or within the Red Cross movement, Norwegian Red Cross is seen as a more trustable partner. Of course, I'm coming from the Norwegian Red Cross, so it's blowing my own trumpet. But because we are honest, we are humble enough to admit of what our capacity is, and also humble enough to know that okay, we have these finances which give us an advantage, and of course it comes with the responsibilities and demands, but we put it openly. And I feel that our partners appreciate this, but then of course the finances are there, and that gives us some kind of asymmetrical power towards this, and that's why we want also to encourage the South-South. One thing that I didn't mention is even with the South-South cooperation, it's always going to be about financing. Like they have the knowledge, they have the skills, but who is going to finance that? And maybe they're not there yet. So, and that's where we see the triangulation, and that's where Norec is still very, very important. That we can use we can support them with the relations that we have with Norec, so that they can be able to access this support, but without our interference. So that Norec is the one that providing finance. We are providing like our expertise, for example, in the knowledge we've accumulated for the last 20 years, the training that we have accumulated in 20 years in terms of how to coordinate. So we can do that without the burden of financing them and having to burden them with that. So, but of course, we're really thinking about it, and I think it's just going to be for the positive. Yes.
Great, that's very good. Also, when we are doing South-South Cooperation, no matter how much the context is similar in the countries, it's still different. And also, in terms of preparing people, I mean, Norec has its model where people are trained for a week before they go out, and they are debriefed when they go back. But in your experience, other people's experience there, like, for instance, you in Norad, how are you training and preparing people for going out? And is that preparation enough, or do people face challenges when they are abroad that could be avoided before they go out?
I briefly mentioned the kind of training courses we provide. Probably not enough, to be frank. But I think it's not only through training. These are very often people with a public servant kind of background. So they will bring, a more often sort of academic approach to this anyway. So we have a newsletter also that we share with our Norwegian institutions, where we bring up these issues. We give them advice as to literature, as I was saying, that they could read and plug into. So I think there are various manners of doing this, but you can't really be fully trained on the context. I think it's a matter of being prepared. As I said, we encourage them to be curious, to ask, how does this work? What do you ordinarily do to, it's a matter of trying to understand the dynamics of the institution you work with and the country that is based with. within. So I think it's mixed in the sense that you have to have different approaches and not just one sort of training course that will solve all of that. And then, of course, like you're doing in Norec, debriefing, what did we learn from this, and actually to draw on those experiences and adapt. I think that kind of adaptive management approach we also have, you're in a continuous sort of learning mode is also important.
Jon, you were quite honest when you gave your presentation. You shed light on some challenges. Do you have any more examples that you could put forward?
Yeah, plenty of examples I can come with. Before I do that, I just get an idea here, because in the light of the Norec system, you have young participants coming home. Their maximum age is 35 years. They have gone through a fantastic journey, the Norec preparation course, being with the partner institution in Norway for 6 to 12 months, and the debriefing course, coming back home, they're full of energy, and they go back to the normal work. These are really resource persons, many of them, who could be used in the next round in the SouthSouth program. And we had many years ago, we had a Fredskop's a Norec senior projects. It doesn't live anymore. What if you are thinking of having a Norec senior again, where you use former of the top candidates you have in the SouthSouth programs? First, you have to do your normal run at a North-South partnership, and you can lean in onto the partners in Norway, like our institution, and we will be very happy to blink out for you the best ones that really because people are different, but many are very brilliant people who come here who would be happy to serve as maybe as a consultant, as we're doing now with these two doctors from Ethiopia. We pay them $3,000 per month to go and work in Malawi for 6 months as teachers and also doing surgeries. And for them, this is very good money, and they are very happy and proud to be called to neighboring countries to participate. And maybe it's difficult to do this on between the two, right? But what is the name? In exchange between two countries, but you can have Malawi could send one to Zanzibar, Zanzibar could send somebody to Ethiopia, Ethiopia could send there, and you can have in your knowledge bank, you can have a list on behalf of all the partner institutions of very qualified source personnel you can use for this. We will be very happy, and maybe like we would be happy. Maybe Ullevål would come with some participants from their programs, Tromsø from there, and we would. And that if you had funding for that, it would not be very expensive, maybe as it would be if it was not Norwegian experts. But they would be very happy, these source participants, to have that chance to do some consultancies, like we see now. They're queuing up to come and help to serve in the neighboring countries. So, but if you, that was just an idea who popped into my mind. But example, yes, sure. In our pediatric hospital in Haukeland earlier this year, 25% of the children and the patients were immigrants or refugees, mainly from Muslim countries, from Middle East, Syria, and from Afghanistan. It's a challenge for our staff, the nurses and doctors, how to handle properly patients from a different culture, especially maybe Muslim culture. A number of the doctors and the nurses in our pediatric hospital has worked in Zanzibar and has got the knowledge to how to work in a Muslim society for a year. That knowledge is very useful for us, how to deal with these new families coming here to our country with that background. We get to learn a lot of the cultural adaptations and so from sending country staff, for instance, to Zanzibar, a Muslim country. Also in infection medicine, we have the National Competence Center in Haukeland in tropical diseases and infectious diseases, TB, malaria, and HIV/AIDS, and so on. So they are running training courses for Norwegian doctors in India every year for 3 weeks in specialization in tropical diseases. And when we had a refugee from Syria here a year ago in a center here with tuberculosis, we don't see that much more in Norway, luckily. But we have a number of our doctors had experience with working with TB patients abroad in our projects in Zanzibar, for instance. They were called on the people who had hands-on experience to handle that part of patients in particular. So we gain a lot of ourselves on this. So these are just a few examples.
Brilliant. That's great to hear. I'm so sorry having to tell you this, but we are reaching the end of the program. And it's been a great pleasure having all of you here in the room with us, people online with us, and also you good people in the panel. we're very much enlightened. And I'd like to say that if you want to stay enlightened, you can sign up for Norec's newsletter, which will be published later this autumn. We have a list out there on one of the tables. If you write down your name and your email, you will continue to be enlightened by us. But for now, before we leave, we have a small token of appreciation here, sort of Norec-wise. There you go, Jon.
Oh, tusen takk.
Elling. This is both for eating and for drinking.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Also for you, State Secretary. Thank you. And lastly for you, Marit, you have one of them already, so you're just going to...
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you so much. Finished for today. Goodbye.